My father, David Van Vactor, um, the composed over 100 pieces, and this first symphony, which I've spoken of in earlier sections of this biographical YouTube, um, won the New York Philharmonic Prize. It was performed in New York with the composer conducting in 1939. Taken him 3 years to write this while he was holding down his position as second chair in the flute section of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and also protege of Frederick Stock, the conductor. Uh, he was holding down several jobs, not only playing flute in the orchestra, and which meant rehearsals, morning rehearsals, after which he would have lunch at his lunch club called the Cliff Dwellers on the top of Orchestra Hall, now in another location in downtown Chicago, and where he'd eat lunch with people like Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, the great architects of the time, and also Booth Tarkington was a writer from Indiana, and from whom he was able to get a text for a huge choral work called The Credo that my father, I think, finished in probably around 1942, was commissioned by the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Fabian Kusevitsky, a relative of Kusevitsky, Fabian Savitsky, who was a nephew, I believe, of Kusevitsky, who conducted the Boston Symphony Orchestra during the 40s and 50s and 60s, until Charles Munch took over that position as conductor of the Boston Orchestra, Boston Symphony. And my father won this New York Philharmonic Prize. Probably announced the prize was announced in 1938, and the symphony was performed in 39, 6 weeks after I was born, and my father was classified as a neoclassicist, but I think he's also could be considered a neo-romantic composer in the tradition of Shostakovich, Sibelius, Prokofiev, and other. I've been listening to a lot of these people just recently with my son, and recently spent quite a while one evening doing a section of this biography on his return to what he had learned from Arnold Schoenberg, and who had taught him classical harmony in 1928 in Vienna, and when Schoenberg was came to Chicago to have his music played at the World's Fair, or maybe before the World's Fair itself, during the normal season of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. My father asked if he could meet with him, and he did so. Schoenberg brought out his pocket watch and put it on the table where they were sitting, and he was to pay $60 an hour, and once they got to about an hour of conversation about music, and maybe my father may have showed him some of his music. I don't know what he showed him, but Schoenberg then asked him what he did, and he said, I'm second flute in the Chicago Orchestra. And Schoenberg said, well, since you're a professional musician, I will not ask you to pay me anything for this time that I've given you today. And thanked him, and then that was the end of it. I'd like to speak a little bit about my father's exploration and experimentation with symphonic form, especially in the first symphony, the symphony in D. After the scherzo movement, which follows the what I think really has to stand as the slow movement, one of his colleagues, when I played this piece, freshly back from Germany, when my father was on sabbatical for 6 months in Santiago de Chile, and playing all over, conducting all over South America, from the north, very north to the very south, to Osorno to La Serena, Concepcion, mostly a German orchestra there. Fortunately, my father was bilingual, trilingual, fluent both in German and Spanish. President of the Spanish and German clubs at Northwestern. His colleague, Guy Bachmann, commented after hearing the first movement of the First Symphony that it was like a scherzo. And there's some truth in this. But after what I consider the slow movement, the adagio, after the brass chorale, and then the beautiful ending of that movement before the scherzo movements, I think one could see the fourth movement as a kind of expanded slow movement, which is exciting because of the tremendously, almost violent responses from the brass section of this, in this case, the Frankfurt Radio Orchestra. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra brass section was famous as being maybe the best brass section in America at the time. My father was learning to conduct from Frederick Stock as his conducting student with a scholarship, I think, of $4,000 a year. And after Stock died, he didn't get any of that money. He went to the board, and a man on the board by the name of Ryerson, who I think was the head of a steel company, said that, well, Mr. Stock is dead. And my father said, but I'm not dead. And my father found that he had a photographic memory. He always conducted from memory. The complete repertoire, all the great symphonies of Brahms, Mozart, the most well-known symphonies of Haydn, the Brahms symphonies and the Beethoven symphonies. He did the complete cycle of Beethoven symphonies right before retiring after 25 years in Knoxville. And after the Ninth Symphony, he announced his retirement to the audience, who was very surprised by this and was very moved by this revelation that this was his last time that he'd be conducting the Knoxville Symphony. which he had made into a very competent, maybe second-class orchestra. It had been an amateur orchestra when he took it over from Bertha Walburn Clark, who started it. And I'd like to speak about this, the last movement of the First Symphony, which through a series of very dramatic and very, very powerful, very conflicting, somewhat conflicting responses from the brass section. It moves towards a very peaceful ending. Actually, that finale, the coda of the First Symphony, he borrows on in the ending of his episodes, 40-minute choral work for large orchestra and double chorus, called Episodes from the Life of Christ, Episodes of Jesus Christ, and he borrows from that that coda from the First Symphony, and he also had borrowed from the end of the what I consider the slow movement part, the adagio part of the symphony before the scherzo, the end of the first movement. He borrows from his suite for two flutes, the canons, the very beautiful minor canons that are in that piece, and the finale, the fourth movement, is like a very elaborately developed theme and variations of as an adagio, as a slow movement, and it's quite different from normal development sections of, let's say, an andante or slow movement. It's the use of counterpoint is evident in that symphony and very important. He was a master of counterpoint, a great student of Daniel Fuchs' work on counterpoint, the Gradus ad Parnassum of Daniel Fuchs, and in his, especially in his writing that he did in the I mentioned, I think in the part of the section about his use of 12-tone technique, about the Sinfonia Breve, then in the finale of that, the great crescendo, which is poco poco a molto. At the height of that, there are 7 voices sounding at the same time. I mean, here counterpoint came in, was absolutely necessary, and a key to that, the success of that hugely powerful ending of the Sinfonia Breve, and written in 1962, and there's the trumpet solo in the finale, in the fourth movement of the First Symphony, is what I think one of the most hardest trumpet parts ever written. Really magnificent. He went back to compliment the first trumpet player in the New York Philharmonic, and the man said, after my father had sort of gushed about how happy it was with what a great job he'd done, he said, Van Vaksher, you're not shitting me, are you? Which I think really funny. You know, I mean, the orchestra players were generally a pretty rough bunch. They loved to tell jokes and kid each other. And my father learned that the reason his German was really quite totally fluent is because there was the German orchestra, and they spoke German. He spoke German every day in the orchestra, so that's why he spoke German so well. And not just having studied at Northwestern. with Professor Hatfield, whose son, Henry Hatfield, was head of the German department at Harvard when I was there, wrote a book on Thomas Mann. At one point, 1942, Friedrich Stock started a rehearsal, tapping his music stand, and said, "Gentlemen, from here on, English will be the language of the Chicago Symphony." And a trombone player leaned over to his neighbor and said, "Was hat gesagt?" He didn't understand what had said in English. And my father was full of wonderful stories about the orchestra, and he gave a long interview. In fact, the Chicago Symphony had requested former players to, at a centenary, 100th anniversary of the beginning of the orchestra, which was started by a man named Thomas, Theodore Thomas, I believe, and they sent a questionnaire, and he recorded answers to talking about all the things that they played, the fact that Isaac Stern gave his debut as a violinist at 14 years old. My father was in the orchestra. This is at the time when Rachmaninoff was coming to play his music, his concertos and so on, and Schoenberg and Hindemith and Prokofiev and Bartók, and I mean, it's just wonderful things that Stock did. I mean, a very interesting, slightly negative thing that I learned about was that Frederick Stock felt that Robert Schumann was terrible at orchestration. However, I think that that maybe the oddity of his orchestration and the sound created a style that is what is so endearing to me about Schumann's symphony, especially the four symphonies, and the horn, the concerto for four horns. And my father wrote a concerto, a quattro for three flutes and harp, which was played 18 times by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He was probably one of the players, along with Ernst Liegl, his colleague, who was first flute, and to whom he sent Dorio Anthony Dwyer as a young aspiring flute player. Instead of teaching him himself, he sent him to his colleague, Ernie Liegl, and she was then the principal flutist of the Boston Symphony, the first woman, first chair in any orchestra in America, and had a great career in Boston. A great friend of my mother and father, and also a friend of mine. And but I mean, the fact that his three flute and harp piece was played 18 times is really quite a feather in his cap. And of course, George Szell conducted the first symphony, and then Fabian Savitsky commissioned also, along with the head of the Marine Corps, Colonel Courtney, a music for Marines, which is a big music, really a symphony, and now listed as his second symphony. The first was listed, a later first symphony, not the symphony in D, but a later first symphony, is now listed as his third symphony. So those are two addenda to my father's biography on YouTube, and I thank you for your patience and for your time, and one day I hope that these YouTube biographical entries about my father's life, a poor preacher's kid becoming one of the great musicians in America. I mean, he started the Aspen Summer Festival with Emmanuel Williams playing Baroque music, playing Bach flute sonatas, a lot from manuscript that he'd gotten in a special library, probably the Newberry Library in Chicago. There were some manuscripts. A lot of the Bach was not even published at that time. But he and Emmanuel Williams, this was funded by this Aspen Summer Music Festival was funded by Walter Picton, who was the president of the Container Corporation, and I think it still goes on. I have to check with my first cousin, John T. Landers, who lives in Vail and may know about the Aspen Festival. My son has been out there at conferences. I think the McKnight Foundation for Biologists, worldwide participation, and the great trout fishing in the streams around Aspen. My father fished them and was a great trout fisherman, and I think he caught his limit. You know, trout like 18 inches long and beautiful. You know, probably 4 or 5 pound trout, rainbows, maybe brookies, maybe brown trout. I don't know what they were. I mean, I caught 5 pound brookie up in Canada when my father and I went up there with a friend from Knoxville, Tennessee, Albert Memon, and we camped out on a lake with 2 French-Canadian guides who cooked for us for 2 weeks on this lake, this beautiful lake with white sand beaches and ice cold with streams running into it, which we also fished in the rapids, and didn't catch any in the streams running into the lake. And this was at the end of the 100 miles after the end of the railroad line in Roberval. Had to go to Montreal, then Roberval by train, and then we flew in with a I think a Cessna airplane, 100 miles into the tundra, to the deep woods of northern Canada, to this lake, you know, fed by beautiful streams and full of trout, and we would troll we didn't come with the right lures, so we got a spoon, and we were able to put a hole in it and attach a set of hooks and attach our fishing lines, and our guides would paddle the canoes, and we would just drag the lures behind. There was a spoon that we had fashioned out of what we found in the cooking tent, and we caught several, and we'd catch a trout, go to an island, start a fire, gut it, take out the innards and clean it, and then the guides with Louis and Joe, French Canadians, would take a skillet and put in a 1/4 pound of butter, saute the trout, and then squeeze a whole lemon over it. It's the most delicious lunches we'd had after fishing. You know, absolutely fresh caught, you know, maybe only 20 minutes out of the water, fabulous. And then I caught a 5 pounder just casting straight out from the shore. And when we tried to bathe by going swimming, we looked up, and there were like 5 leeches coming from all directions. We got the hell out of the water. Mosquitoes were terrible. We had some um, some something like off that would kept the mosquitoes away from us, and hats with nets around them and keep them away, and bought all our gear at our fishing gear and at Abercrombie and Fitch. The our our knapsacks and sleeping bags, and the tents were provided by the guides. Then they had a separate tent for it was a cooking tent. We ate outside with a checkered red and white tablecloth, and they cooked wonderful meals for us, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we get up in the morning, and there was ice on the pail of water in the tent. It was cold, but beautiful. And that was right before I went away to school for the first time to the Lawrenceville School at 13 years old. That was 1953. And so that does it for my addition to the biography of my father's life as a flutist and composer and music professor who started the Fine Arts Department at the University of Tennessee, which still goes on, and later became a composer laureate of the state of Tennessee, a lifetime honor, and had wonderful students, both Richard and Gilbert Trisall. Gilbert, my father commissioned Gilbert's first symphony it was a Ford Foundation grant, and along with a symphony by a man named John Boda, and Gilbert's symphony is absolutely magnificent. One of the best first symphonies I know, and he's now lives in Dallas, Texas. I mean, he became quite an expert on counterpoint. Actually, wrote a book about it. And probably, as a result of the classes he had on counterpoint with my father, who taught not only first year harmony, orchestration, conducting, composition, as well as counterpoint. And I love to see Gilbert's comments about my father's master's thesis at the School of Music at Northwestern on the Art of the Fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach. That would be very interesting. And Gilbert had also conducted some of my father's best pieces, the Nachtlied for soprano and string orchestra, and which is from a section from also Sprach Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. There's called the Night Song, and then he also conducted the 4 or 5 of the Trojan Women's Suite, which is a beautiful 12-tone piece. There are about five pieces from that suite. It was the music would have been the music for the opera he was trying to write. Unfortunately, never got written. He conducted a lot of operas in Knoxville because of the Grace Moore fellowship, a scholarship, in which a lot of singers like Jeannie Sparks, Ramona Elson, and others benefited from. And they had an opera program at the University of Tennessee in the music department. and people like Ed Zambara and a tenor named Beatsis, were important people in that, and other singers. And my father did Fidelio, and my father did La Traviata, and he did also Hansel and Gretel, and a wonderful actor named John Cullum was in Hansel and Gretel, and also in a piece by Pierney called The Children of Bethlehem, about the children who had been in one of the crusades, the Children's Crusade. And it's a beautiful piece by Pierney, rarely performed, but it's typical of my father to be performing rather unusual, not well-known pieces, obscure pieces, and they did a great job with it. I remember it very well. I was at rehearsals and also I think at the final performance, which was really beautiful. Thank you for your time. I hope one day this is all typed up and becomes a book. Remember the story about Stravinsky coming to lunch at the Cliff Dwellers, and my father tried to get him to talk about music. He wouldn't talk about music, but all he would say is, the meat is good, the wine is good, and in German, der Fleisch ist gut, der Wein ist gut, and that was it. And I was just listening to a wonderful piece, I think, the Dumbarton Oaks of Stravinsky today. Is absolutely brilliant, and so witty and cheerful and full of joy. What a guy! I mean, hard to beat. I mean, you think of the greats. I mean, I think the greatest music in the 20th century is Russian, and at the end of I mean, you have people like Nikolai Miaskovsky, who wrote 21 symphonies, and then Glier, who wrote the Ilan Mormitz, and Shedrin and others, Prokofiev, Shostakovich, and then ending with Schnittke, who I think is my favorite composer of the 20th, at the end of the 20th century. And I think combining it all, Rachmaninoff, Lazanov, Mussorgsky, Tchaikovsky, Borodin, there's nothing like Russian music in the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. It's nothing like it, nothing like it. I mean, the Rachmaninoff concertos and the Second Symphony, fantastic stuff as far as I'm concerned. Now that is neo-romantic music par excellence. But anyways, here I end, and again, for your patience and your time, thank you. Good evening, or bonne soirée, as we say here in France. It's been a beautiful day in Normandy, in the Pays d'Auge. Fabulous. I went around the house about 12 times today, and the rose, picked a rose, and a pink rose, and a red rose, and a beautiful tulip with yellow and red, extraordinary colors on it. One that had fallen down, I picked up and brought in. It's just absolutely amazing what's going on in our garden. This region is famous for its beautiful rose gardens. There are places like Vendôme, magnificent gardens here. And ruins in Jumièges, on the way to Rouen, down up the Seine River from the estuary region toward Rouen. You get to Jumièges, which is ruins, magnificent ruins, and there are other wonderful. There are chateaus here, like La Grange, fantastic double chateau, which is just beautiful. Um, a manor house like ours. You can see our house online. The photographer, um, Mark Urbitz, has done a beautiful job. And you can Google us and probably go with GPS, zero right in on us, our house, and maybe see pictures of us sitting outside or standing in front of our doorway. We're having just a magnificent time. We expect friends from Cambridge, Massachusetts, in about 5 days, and a whole bunch of friends of my son Nicholas's, Denis and Guillaume Bonneau, and perhaps their mother Jacqueline, and Mark and Dasha. Mark is a great photographer, a German young man, who's really a brilliant photographer who's now doing fashion photography. And I hope to start our magazine, a new magazine, to take place of the one we started years ago in Boston and Andover, Massachusetts, called Canto Review of the Arts. This will be Montparnasse, and it'll be a fashion magazine as well as a review of films, gallery shows, museum shows, and films, books, and music, and a lot going on in France, and maybe even a entertainment guide with times and places and of the wonderful things that are going on. I mean, I think there's a Velasquez show in Paris at the moment that I definitely want to see. And the last show I saw was of Vallotton, and George Braque works on paper or glued paper, papier collé, which are really collages, which inspired me to do some terrific collages with some of my big brush ink paintings. I had a huge brush, beautiful, huge brush, as you know, with the brush part as big as my hand here, and did some big abstract brush paintings with India ink, with China ink, and out of one of those, I glued on some papers that I painted colors on, wash, and so I made a papier collé, a collage, inspired by that wonderful show in the Grand Palais. And Vallotton is a fabulous artist who I hope has a good influence on my work. And I want to speak about one of my great discoveries, a book given to me by Marie-Claude Lambotte, who is a great writer on melancholy and a psychoanalyst, and also has written a lot about art and from a psychoanalytic point of view, especially the works of Albrecht Dürer on melancholy, and a large work on the work of being a Lacanian analyst, a work on coming from her clinical practice. She is called to deliver seminars all over the world, far places, Brazil, Italy, and a brilliant theorist and a terrific writer, not only on art and psychoanalysis. She brought me a book of the sculptures of Franz Xavier Messerschmidt, with the faces that are so extraordinary in their expression of facial expression that are just amazing. I mean, with their emotional range, and in fact, I did copied one today as well as I could, with my failing eyesight from way too many strokes. I lost about 95% of my left eye vision, and I'm trying to teach myself to read again using a marker as imitating what I'd been taught at the Spaulding Rehab Hospital in Boston by a speech therapist named Baltz, who was a terrific teacher, teaching me to scan again, which was part of what I lacked. And then, so I've been rereading some of my own work and rereading my favorite work on science by Gerald Holton called the Thematic Origins of Scientific Discovery, which is one of my favorite books. And I've used a marker, a piece of plywood to be able to scan over quickly to left margin with this aid, and so I'm trying to follow the way I was taught to repair my reading ability after my stroke by my speech therapist at Spaulding, or now called Partners, Spaulding Rehab Hospital in Boston, and where I did got a lot of help with physical therapy from physical therapists, teaching me to walk again without a cane, with and without a cane, and also work on my left hand, which I cannot make a fist with, because my fingers have become rigid. It's almost as if it were paralyzed. My right hand I can write with and eat with, and I keep working with a spring action exerciser to keep it strong. I'm getting a lot of arthritis. My joints are all swollen up. Getting very hard to write, and probably will be hard to paint again. To move my finger. But I did do a drawing today of a Messerschmitt face, which is just fantastic. It's a great way to learn the structure of the face and all its shadows. And from the corner of the mouth down, this crevice that can come, the lines around the eyes, and these sculptures by Messerschmitt are an absolute revelation. And I don't even remember the publisher of this book, but it's an absolutely magnificent book. Another great book I was given recently by a friend was the book Whistler, Turner, and Monet, and their influence on Claude Monet. And I just recently wrote a prose poem about Monet, who used to do these quick caricatures of people in the town he grew up in, Le Havre, which is really called the harbor, would be translated the harbor, on the street. He'd do quick sketches and people would pay for them. And he decided, well, I can make a living at this. I should become an artist. So he went across the filthy Seine River, the estuary that comes down from Paris, totally polluted and full of sewage, and until it joins with the North Sea, the Channel, and then gets diluted. So he crossed over from Le Havre and to study with Boudin, which is Boudin is actually a white veal sausage available here in France, and Boudin was doing these wonderful paintings and really one of the first people to experiment with the making of using pigment powders and probably turpentine and linseed oil. He would make oil paints for, which you could fill a tube with, and Monet learned how to prepare a canvas. Perhaps with gesso, I'm not sure, from Boudin, and to mix paints, and really got his first instruction before his father, who was quite well-to-do, was able to send him to art school in Paris, where he married, and came home and had this glorious career, as others came from Pont-Aven and Cézanne from Aix-en-Provence to Honfleur to paint here, as well as a Dutch painter named Janken, Janken, and then a wonderful painter named Hamburg, and anyway, I've said all I have to say. No more news about that.
So, what did you talk about?